And today I'd like to introduce a very special guest and dear friend of mine, Aditi. Thank you so much for joining Chai Chats today, and to maybe help viewers get a bit of an understanding of who Aditi is, I'll just pass it over to you to introduce yourself.
Hi, Akhil. Thank you so much for having me. As you said, my name's Aditi. I am currently a student at UBC, and I guess a little bit of background on me. So I was born in Pune, India, and we lived there for the first couple of years. We lived in Sharjah, UAE, for a couple of years before we immigrated to Canada in 2007. And so have pretty much lived in Canada for most of the life that I can actually remember. But yeah, I'm super excited to be here. Thank you.
Hey, we're really excited. But before we get into the crux of the Chai Chats, what I like to do with people is play this quick exercise called What's in a Name. So basically, our names are an extension of our identity. They sort of connect us with the unspoken parts of our identity. So I'm just curious to know, first of all, how do I pronounce your name properly? Because I know I butcher it all the time. And also, where does it come from and what does it mean to you? What's your, I guess, personal connection to it be like?
Yeah, so I guess the Indian way of pronouncing my name is Aditi. Um, at least in like northern India, my parents and my grandparents, it's like Aditi. My westernized version that I usually go by now is Aditi. In terms of meaning, so the meaning my parents always told me was it's the mother of all gods. Some of the other meanings include intelligence, and mother of all gods, which honestly for me, I take pride in my name. I think it's super cool. Um, you know, in India, they have those like comic books, which right now are slipping my mind the name of it. But reading those comic books and kind of like learning about the Hindu mythology and then kind of seeing like Aditi in those comics is really interesting and inspiring because I think it motivates me to be the confident, ambitious person that I think I am.
Yeah, I love that. Love that so much. And it's interesting because you first started off with like Aditi, how it has different meanings. And I think that's really cool because when you look at a lot of Indic names that are derived from Sanskrit, for example, uh,
Mm-hmm.
like in English, you have single words that have single meanings, but in a lot of Indic languages, you have one word with like hundreds of meanings. And I think like that's pretty cool to see how language plays a huge role in our identity, right? I think now we can sort of delve into the chai chat. Um, and so as I was talking to you earlier, but chai chats is really about like exploring some of the unspoken parts of our cultures and bringing those to light and hopefully inspiring and invoking that sense of pride in other, Indic youth to sort of say that it's okay to be your full brown self. And so one of my questions I have for you today is, um, how would you explain to someone who has no idea of what your culture looks like? How would you explain that to them? And I challenge you in some way to maybe tell us about some of the unspoken things that aren't always seen within your culture. Because from day to day, when I like speak to my non-Indian friends, they know about butter chicken and samosas, and they know about the music and celebrations. But I would be interested to know, like, what are some of the things that a lot of people don't know about your
Okay, this is a difficult question. Um, yeah, so starting off, I guess, with the food portion, it's always interesting because I literally went on a Bumble date a couple of weeks ago. And when I mentioned that I liked Indian food, because I don't know if he completely understood that I was Indian or not, but I was like, yeah, I like Indian food. And he was like, oh, I love butter chicken. I was like, there's more to Indian food than butter chicken. My mom is a really good cook, and so my sister's friends love my mom's cooking. And she'll make them like chana masala, butter chicken. What my sister's friend's favorite food is aloo gobi, and I really find that great that her favorite food isn't butter chicken and instead
That's true.
because that's like such a different thing. Like one of my favorite foods is bhindi, okra, and it's simple, but it's so tasty. And so there's so much more to it. Even like on the non-veg side, where it's not just like butter chicken or tandoori chicken. There's like chicken tikka, malai tikka, all these different tikkas, which are all different blends, and I love it so much. So food is definitely a big part of my culture. In terms of other parts of my culture that I explain to people. In festivities, I think people always just narrow it down to Diwali, but there's so much more. Again, like Diwali and Holi are really big common ones. And so when my friends ask about them, I try to like explain the mythological background behind those festivals, like with Diwali, like Ram, Sita, Lakshman, like the story of them. Holi, again, I try and tell them it's not just about throwing the colors around. There's like, it's the evil or start of a new year. And that's why like the night before you're supposed to have like a bonfire and like give some offerings and those types of things. So the culture as I know it and I've learned, because again, like different parts of India have different cultural practices. Then another big one that my family celebrates is Ganpati. And again, I tell them the story of Ganpati and how Ganpati and why Ganpati has an elephant head and those types of things. So I think it's always really cool to like tell them the mythological stories behind it, because that's something that I find very interesting about Hinduism.
I'm actually curious because you mentioned how like you really find the mythology and maybe the deeper meanings behind a lot of these festivals that a lot of people don't know about. And I'm curious if you could provide maybe a bit of a journey into one of these celebrations that, you know, maybe one that isn't the Diwali or Holi, but something else that you really enjoy, and maybe explain to me or the viewers what is the story behind one of the festivities?
The exact stories behind, I don't know, but I think the story of how Ganpati came to have an elephant head is always cool. So his
Could you share that with us?
Yeah. So his parents are Lord Shiva and Goddess Parvati. And so I think the story went basically Goddess Parvati wanted some alone time, and to make sure nobody disturbed her, she made Ganpati out of like the sand and then blessed him to life. And so he's standing guard. And at that time, he was a normal boy, a human boy. Then Lord Shiva comes and he wants to talk to Parvati, and Ganpati won't let him get by because he's loyal to Parvati. And so Shiva, in his anger, because he is the god of like destruction or something, cut off his head, cut off Ganpati's head. And when Parvati found out, she was like really mad and really upset. So then Shiva, to kind of make it up to her, he sent his followers or soldiers out and was like, bring me back a head so I can like bring him back to life. And the first animal they came across was an elephant. So they brought him back an elephant head. And so he reattached the elephant head and blessed him. And so that's why he kind of has an elephant head. Yeah, I think it's just a story.
It's a really cool story. I feel like a lot of Hindu mythology has these, like, you have all of these deeper meanings, but also on one hand, you just have a lot of like pure, epic, powerful, and fun stories, which sort of help also keep the culture alive, right? And
Yeah,
I guess one of my questions I have is, you know, definitely in Hinduism and Hindu mythology, there's so many different deities and stories and like I was also going online to see how many different Hindu festivals there are. And like there's almost one for almost every day, right? And I posed a question to you of why do you think there is all of this like richness within Hindu culture? And maybe tying it more into like seeing how Hinduism has sort of lasted for so many years, do you think that has anything to do with the storytelling that's involved within Hinduism?
I definitely like it's very amazing how many festivals and everything there are. I think part of the reason there's so much is because one, yes, in Hindu mythology there are a lot of different gods. There's gods I haven't even heard of that other parts of India worship that I don't know, right? And I think that's really amazing. And I think part of that comes from Hinduism's general kind of acceptance of other people and others' cultures. And that's why within India itself, there's so many different cultures, practices. Like if you look at the Indian calendar, like my parents get it every time they go to India, or it's like if they don't go in 2 years, their friends will go and their friends will bring them back calendars. There's so many. And while not all families celebrate or necessarily follow every single one, it's really amazing to me how accepting it is. Like I remember I was having this conversation with my parents once, and while we're not the most religious family, I think one of the biggest parts about Hinduism that they truly resonate with and also try and like impart on us is kind of the acceptance of everyone and cultures. And also just Hinduism is also, I find, pretty accepting of different kind of levels of practice.
Yeah, yeah.
Because just within like my family, my extended family, our family friends in India and in Canada, like everybody has different levels of practicing these practices.
That's actually so true. And I completely resonate with you in how accepting, and part of that acceptance, I think, as you mentioned, comes from how diverse it is in the various ways that Hinduism is practiced. Because I think one thing, like, one thing my brother and I started doing, because he's in Toronto, so one thing we started doing to get more connected is we like read the Mahabharata and the Bhagavad Gita together, because we recently both got really like invested in Hinduism over the summer, and so um, I remember in one of the shlokas within the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna, he says to Arjuna that the path of devotion is only one path of the Hindu of the way of life, right? That devotion is actually one path, and there are many other different paths. So it's interesting to see how, like, Hinduism, like to me, when I talk about Hinduism, I see it more as a way of life rather than a religion itself, because again, religion is one path of life, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's that or nothing type of thing, right? Like you can be an atheist, you don't have to believe in God to be a Hindu, or you don't have to do the rituals, or you can do the rituals. Like you can do anything you want, as you sort of alluded to, right? Like you can basically be whoever you want to be and be a Hindu if Hinduism is just a way of being, right?
Yeah.
It is really special. Yeah.
I mean, I think it's also interesting I think it's kind of important to differentiate between Hinduism as like a culture and a religion, but also maybe some of the societal norms or societal acceptances. I think these kind of notions that are thought of right now have come more from maybe colonialism time as opposed to before that.
Yes.
And it's important to, I think, differentiate the two. And as you said, and I said previously, like that's one of the great things about Hinduism that I really find amazing is just its acceptance of everything. And I think that's why it's so strong. Even like spirituality now and the growing yoga
Yeah.
influences. The growing practice of yoga, like all of these originated in Hinduism.
Yes. So I think it's also important to go back and also like not remember, but also have that understanding of what colonialism really did to the Indian people, and how it's not just the past, but it's also in some ways very much a part of our present lives, right?
Yeah.
As exactly what you mentioned, and how like certain beliefs or practices that exist in India also exist as a result of colonialism. And I think this also brings me to my next question about, do you think there should be a greater importance in preserving Hindu culture or other Indic indigenous cultures as we move forward in the era of globalization and technology?
Yeah, I think it's really important to preserve the cultures. Um, I think it's really important that we should work towards preserving these cultures. I'll be honest, I have not been the most in tune with my cultural practices, but I'm trying to become more aware and more conscious so I can, um, preserve it, teach it to like the next generation, like make sure like my kids are in tune with that part of their identity as well.
Yeah.
Like whenever I go home for a visit, my dad will have us all sit in the God's room, and then we'll do there's a couple of like shloks that he'll kind of have us read through, just kind of to learn. Another thing is like we always say a prayer before we eat dinner, a prayer in the morning. And even if I don't do it every day, if I really feel like before an exam, I make sure to do it because I need that extra blessing, I guess. So in my times of need, I still always turn back to, I guess, my religion and my gods. But it's something that I think I know I need to work on, and I need to reflect and connect more. And so in general, I think it's really important because I would hate to like lose it completely. Like I'm very much a mix of the two cultures of Canadian and Indian, and I don't want to lose either part of it. But especially like I need to like make sure to retain my Indian identity because I find it's really important. And again, back to the initial thing about uniqueness, I like how unique it makes me. And recently I've realized more and more that some of my outlooks on life have been influenced quite greatly with like Hinduism and like I guess its interpretation on certain things. I guess the interpretations my parents made from it and the interpretations that they I guess taught us.
What are some values that you carry from your parents, and what are some values that you developed yourself with your own connection to Hinduism?
Yeah, but some of the values that I think they've passed on to me is the importance of hard work. You know, if you work hard, it will pay off eventually. You know, things might seem rough right now, but I think if you keep persevering through it, it will all be worth it in the end. That is a big value that my parents have passed on, the importance of hard work and also the importance of education. Like, I think education is really important. I think it's important to have some sort of higher education, and maybe not everyone is cut out for university, but some sort of higher training for wherever you're passionate.
You mentioned something earlier about, hard work and some of the values that were passed down to you. And I think maybe that's also one unspoken part of Hinduism or of Indic culture is the concept of, Dharma, of your duty or what your actions are, right? And at different parts of your life, there are different like actions or duties that one upholds, right? Like one thing that my parents I can completely relate in terms of hard work. What my parents tell me is, what is like your dharma as a student is to be a student, right? And to perform your dharma through your actions of studying and through hard work. And what's your idea of dharma, I guess is my question.
I've never really heard the word dharma before, but I definitely like agree with you in that my outlook on life has always been you're a product of your actions, and that has been reflected and kind of emphasized as well with my parents and like their siblings, where they're a product of their actions through their hard work and everything. They've been able to like live a good life for themselves.
To people who may not understand the meanings behind puja and of prayer, do you, I guess maybe one aspect of it is, do you see it only as prayer, or maybe are there certain deeper meanings that people aren't aware of that you could potentially shed light on?
Hinduism is more than just the prayers.
Yeah.
Like again, I probably identify as like I identify as like a Hindu and an agnostic. I remember like when I first met my friend, like she identified very strongly with her religion and culture, like Judaism. And at the time, I was like, like I just identify as myself. I don't necessarily identify, like I identify strongly with being Indian, but maybe not as strongly with Hinduism. And recently I've been learning more about it and realizing how much that has actually impacted my identity as a person. I think, again, it's more than just the prayers you say. Like, I don't say prayers every day. I should, but I don't. But like, I have a idol in my room. So like my mini temple, because most Hindus usually have like a temple at their homes. So in university, I've always had one in my room. They're not 1,000 gods. Mine is just idol of Ganpati. I believe my sister also has an idol of Ganpati in her room. I guess, yeah, in my way of, like, in my, I guess, identity and connection with my religion, God is everywhere. Right? Like, we go on vacation, my dad still says it every day. We don't have an idol in the room, but he still says it because God is everywhere. God is in you. Or you say it for your own kind of habit and prayer. Which again, like you say the prayer, and then after I'll like make a wish. Be like, please let me do good on the thing.
Yeah.
And I think it's different for everyone. And while I do think like to an extent, maybe it's like, I do think that people who say it every day or something are more religious, but I think it's again very different for everybody.
Yes.
Like I don't identify as the most religious person by any means, but like as I've been learning more about Hinduism, I realized that that's okay, because I think in my opinion, the parts that matter about it, I do identify with, or the parts that matter to me actually have come from these influences.
I think you said one thing that really stood out to me is you said that like God is everywhere and it's within you. And I think that's sort of what I've come to understand with the thousands of deities and idols and gods that we have, is that it's, as you said, that sort of God is a reflection of everything, right? From sort of even the water that we drink to like sort of, I believe they've put some sort of number on it. Like I read somewhere that there are apparently 33,000 different, like there's a certain number of gods, but I think that also might just be indicative of that era, that maybe, who knows, there may have been 33,000 different people, and God was also like a reflection of themselves, right? You know, the connection that you have with yourself is divine. Like there's divinity within you, within me, within the person next door, right? And I think that maybe perhaps creates a lot of that acceptance that we see everyone almost as one, as this one universal sort of energy, right?
Mm-hmm. Like
Yeah.
again, the thing with just if you're in a tough time and you maybe want to seek some refuge somewhere in your beliefs, like you don't need to be in a temple to do that. You could just meditate where you are, and reflect on it because it's within you. Yeah. I think definitely like one of the earlier questions on like preserving it, it's communicated in the storytelling way, lets you take your own inferences from these stories and apply it to your lifestyle. Like my mom was, she was part of this reading group and they were reading the Gita 5 a.m. every day or
Wow.
5 a.m. every Saturday for like 20 weeks or something, right? Which again, it takes that commitment on her part to like wake up at 5 a.m. every Saturday to attend these sessions. Like I haven't read any of the scriptures, but like the Mahabharata is there's a movie on it. I've watched that with Arjun and Krishna and like all the other like stories. I think has been a great way of teaching kids about these stories and again kind of helping them make their own inferences
Yes.
and adaptations and adapt these kind of teachings to their life of what's maybe worked and what's maybe not worked as well.
It's so different the way that the same messages are conveyed, but in the form of a story, which I find really
Yeah.
similar, as you mentioned, to like Greek mythology and even indigenous cultures.
I think it's also almost like definitely like appreciated.
I feel like, and what scares me, I hope this isn't the case, but what scares me in the next couple of decades is where Hinduism is almost lost, where all of the richness and um, like beautiful aspects are taken, but there's no acknowledgement of where it comes from. And that's a scary thing to think about.
Yeah. I think that is why I want to better my connection with it so I can pass it on to my children. And I've definitely noticed that over the generations, I think practices have been lost, maybe especially in like the last two generations compared to where like my grandparents are pretty religious, my parents are not as much, right? And like both of them have very deep connections with India and Indian history and the culture, but I think they're not as religious as their parents were, and I'm not as religious as my parents are. And so I'm scared if that the next generation just isn't religious at all. And so it's like taking that extra effort to make myself more aware, to make my kids and like the future generations more aware. So it's not lost, like, because this is one of the most oldest cultures in the world. So that would be tragic. Even like as we globalize, like there's a lot of like fusion, and I think fusion is very cool and very great, but I think it's important to retain the original as well.
Yes. Could you clarify maybe what you mean by religious behavior in a way to preserve culture?
I think earlier the same way when I was like religion is more than just prayers, but I think like knowing those prayers is important. That's the thing that could easily be lost. Um, but like knowing those prayers, knowing the stories behind the festivities. Like when I think of like when I describe my grandparents as religious, it's because they celebrate more of all the different uh, festivities or occasions that appear on the Hindu calendar, right? Like my grandma fasts pretty often because there's all these different fasts that can be done. My mom keeps a couple of fasts. I think Chaturthi she keeps, but like even between my mom and my aunt, they follow different ones, or my aunt follows more than my mom does, and I don't follow any, which is a thing of maybe I should. But apart from just the practices, I think it's important to know why you're doing these practices. And I think that is something that's being lost. And that is something we need to fight even harder to retain, is the meaning behind these practices. It's one thing to just do it. It's easy to keep a fast. It's harder to know why you're doing it, or doing it because you know the importance of it and you resonate with the importance and values behind it is more important. And I think that's something that as a generation and as a culture, we need to try and make sure we impart. And obviously this is different because like I'm an immigrant and I've lived in Canada for the greater part of my life. So obviously I'm probably different than my cousins and and everything, but definitely India itself has progressed so much in the last like 10, 15, 20 years that like even when we go back to visit, every time we're trying to figure out where we are. And it's just developed so much like technologically and structurally that like you wonder how it has changed in terms of its cultural connections.
Yes.
My parents will keep stuff, you know, we will celebrate festivals. And when we do, they'll like share the stories behind it.
Yes.
But like right now, I can't necessarily always remember the stories behind it, right? And I don't think even they know sometimes the stories behind it. It's more like, oh, we do this because we've just always done this, but that shouldn't be the reason.
You mentioned something really powerful, that when you take away the intention, when you take away the why, it's very easy to separate practice from culture. And I think that's very much evident in yoga, right? Because in the West, people see yoga as this way of, being more flexible, or even if it is mental health and sort of the psychology behind it, because there's no knowing of its origins, it's very easy to separate yoga from India, right? And it's also, as you said, like even growing up, previously I had no knowledge of what the meaning behind Diwali or, Mahashivratri or even Holi were, and I would just practice them. And then there was a certain point where I was like, I feel like I'm just performing action, but I don't know why I'm doing it. So I think I'm just gonna leave and not do it anymore. But now that I'm immersing myself in the storytelling, in like the mythology, in the values, and that the like those unspoken, I mean not unspoken, but those intangible aspects draw me even closer to Hinduism, which is interesting. So like storytelling is very much like, it's a huge component in the in the existence of culture. Right?
Yeah, I would love to take like a Hindu mythology course.
Hmm.
I think that would be really interesting.
Yeah.
And I think that would also be a great way to maybe like learn about the different stories, because obviously I don't know all of them. Nobody knows all of them. And even the course wouldn't tell you all of them, but it would be maybe a wider base to start from.
Yes. And it would just be so much fun and interesting to like know about even like the romance and the epic like battle stories and everything. Like I'm about that. Yeah.
The stories are epic. It's such a great word. Like you think back to poetry, and I think epics are a type of poetry as well, right? And it's like these battles are epic. The way that they're told is epic.
So I think one of my final questions before we wrap up today is, what would you like to say to any person who's struggling with balancing both their maybe North American identity and their Indic identity?
I think we're all unique and we all have our own relationship with both parts of our identity. It's definitely something I have struggled with and I continue to struggle with. But I think it's just learning to balance it. I think earlier when we were talking about how Hinduism is a very open, accepting culture, I think in that sense it's very or not very easy, but it's totally doable to balance these two identities together and find our own interpretation and balance. And like till not very long ago, a lot of my beliefs were just, I thought, my beliefs. And then when I started learning a little bit more about the religion and the culture, I realized that these beliefs actually came from there. And I was like, oh, okay, this is really cool. This is really interesting, and gave me like a new light. Even just having this conversation now has helped me dive deeper into certain parts of my identity that I maybe hadn't before. And so it's an evolving connection. It's an evolving relationship, and take your time, find your own thing. I think just, be true to who you are.
Okay. And I guess that's a perfect way to end on that note. Be who you are. And thanks again, Aditi, for joining me on Chai Chats. Let's do a chai cheer.
Chai cheer.
Hey.
For having me. This was really great. I really enjoyed being here and having this talk with you. I think it was very reflective for myself as well. Yeah, thank you.